Hello and welcome to LawWiser On Air. I'm your host, Aman Abbas, and today we are diving into one of the most debated policy shifts of the year. That is the Promotion and Regulation of Online Gaming Act 2025. This law has sparked conversations across industries. So a lot of people who were earning money perhaps are little um, confused as to how to do it. A lot of people who are making money by endorsing these games are also kind of thinking what to do now. But jokes apart, I think the main conversations that are happening are between startups, investors, gaming companies, policymakers, as well as legal experts. Now, to help us decode its implications, I'm joined by two sharp legal minds, Angad Varma and Juhi Chawla, both partners at Tua Associates. Welcome, Angad and Juhi.
Thank you, Aman.
Thank you,
So,
Aman.
Angad, I'll start with you, Angad. The Parliament has passed the Promotion and Regulation of Online Gaming Bill 2025, which outrightly bans real money online games across India. Could you briefly outline what this law entails and what prompted its passage, and particularly in a very short span of time?
So, Aman. So, Aman, essentially, this act, which has now come into force, bans any kind of online games involving monetary stakes, irrespective of whether they are based on skill or simply by luck and chance. This is also not just a ban, but this is also a criminalization of this act as an offense. So, the government has imposed a 3 year punishment, including a fine up to 1 crore. So there are actually very, very serious consequences for now companies which ran online games which carried monetary stakes. The act also purportedly promotes esports, which are based purely on skill and do not involve wagering of money. But essentially, the industry was, behind the aspect of online games, which involved monetary stakes. They won't be classified as simply as esports. And the government has pushed this regulation in on the basis of a public health rationale, saying that it leads to addiction, loss of money, there are privacy related issues. So that essentially is the object with which the government brought this legislation. It was passed in parliament without much debate on what consequence it would have on the economy, on the job market, players who are already here, on foreign investment. So while they had a rationale which was well intended, but the way the act has come across, which is an absolute prohibition rather than a regulation framework, may not be the most palatable thing for the industry.
And Angad, I think what we are hearing is that people would be going to the courts, and there will be a lot of litigations happening. What, in your view, could be the potential grounds to challenge this bill?
So, one, of course, there have been a consistent line of judgments of various high courts which have identified what are games of skill. Games of skill are essentially very different from, betting and wagering and games of chance and luck where there is no skill involved. So, when any law is propounded, where there are consistent line of judicial rulings, what it must do is it must deal with the foundation and substance of those judgments in order to negate it. So that, in my view, is perhaps the most fundamental ground. Aside of that, betting and wagering is a state subject. To my understanding, it falls in list 2 under entry 34. This has been enacted by the center. There were already various state regulations which existed, which regulated games of these natures. So again, it is a conflict. And in this regard, there is a constitutional debate which occurred before this entry was put into the state list, where Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, when the constitution was being debated in the Constituent Assembly, clearly stated that for a very specific reason it's being brought into entry 2. Otherwise, matters which are not covered by any entry move automatically into entry 3, which give the union prevalence to pass law, and that law prevails over the state law. So that also becomes a primary ground for challenge, aside of the disproportionality, because there are already several thousands of crores which have been invested into this industry. There are several jobs, and to simply come out with a law which prohibits and bans and criminalizes, right, without kind of first perhaps considering the option of regulation, may be seen as disproportionate. So, in my view, these could be the three fundamental grounds of challenge that we may see in the coming few weeks.
In fact, I have a follow-up question to this, which is that, I mean, in fact, you've talked about the investors' money in it, the jobs, and all of that. But government has actually taken a ground, as I could see, is that more to do with social welfare. The kind of financial distress people can get into because of the real money gaming and addictions and all of that. So how do you weigh in both? Like, on one hand, you have, societal, pressures, of doing something like this. On the other hand, you have investments and jobs and all of that. So what's your view on that? In fact, Juhi, if you can weigh in there.
Aman, just to, you're right to say that the statement on objects has clearly spelled that they're looking at social welfare, trying to curb financial fraud, data privacy. There's also some mention of, some money laundering activities, etc. But what we need to understand and look at is this industry currently is growing, and it is presently pegged at anything between $3.8 billion and likely to grow multifold, expected to reach about $9 billion by 2030. We're looking at an impact of almost 2 lakh jobs. The exchequer is also at a loss of about 30,000 crores from GST, TDS, and other ways of taxing the industry. But the question that beckons is social welfare different from economic consequences? Are we, while we're trying to advocate for social welfare, of course there are perils, there's no denying it. But is there a way forward of regulating than prohibiting or going for a blanket ban? My view on that is that you cannot take away social welfare and economic consequences separate from the other. We're definitely, by way of a blanket ban, putting away the digital first digital economy in a very big way, and that should have been regulated and not prohibited in the manner that has been done.
Yeah, I think there is another angle to it. Like, for example, jobs are important to be preserved because we have seen the consequences of tariffs that are being put. So I think the jobs are needed to be preserved. At the same time, in fact, I also wanted to bring in another angle to it, to what you said, and which is that if, say, for example, this is banned in India, internet is global, and what if people have started going to offshore avenues, and that's where I think the risk is bigger. So so when you actually look at it, what are the possibilities of that happening, and what is it that kind of a movement from Indian players to foreign players, which we don't know whether they are regulated or not, how that is going to impact the society?
Like you're absolutely correct to say, the whole reason for bringing this bill and one of the key reasons that they brought it about was to prevent offshore sort of, network that is growing and growing very rampantly, if you, say the least. Instead of actually leading to a case of regulation, the prohibition has resulted in two things. There are reports coming from various corners. Unregulated markets are seeing unprecedented downloads and engagement from Indian users. So much so that recently, as of yesterday, there was a report that they were unable to handle the traffic as far as fantasy sports and iGaming was concerned, leading to a complete shutdown of their websites and their apps. Where are the 200 million users that exist in the Indian ecosystem going to go? You're basically giving them a channel which is offshore. That's how it mostly happens, right? When you prohibit something, it goes underground. Here, it's going offshore. What are the problems that they're going to face? One, there is no KYC. There is no user identification. There is no way of ascertaining age limits. There is also no licensing. It's a completely unregulated market. No way of grievance redressal. So we're actually adding to the problem than actually trying to control it. So offshore betting, offshore gambling is going to increase and not decrease in the way that we see it today.
So just one thing I'd like to add here, Raman, that I think also it would lead to a loss of taxes that could have been recovered if this was regulated. So prohibition could never have been a solution to a problem like this. It should have been more stringent regulation, which would have perhaps also made the treasury richer, would have created jobs, would have helped entrepreneurs and startups come with ingenious ideas. And I'm talking purely on games of skill. I'm not talking on betting and wagering and all of those. So those are things that could have been promoted in a more regulated fashion.
Right, right. Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, the point that you made earlier, Angad, about the kind of consequences it has for the gaming companies, like imprisonment and searches without warrant and things like that. How do you think that is going to impact? I mean, what's the kind of signal it is going to give to the startup ecosystem, and what could have? I mean, and do you think this is going to kind of if this is challenged in the court, where does it stand?
Right. No, I'd be extremely worried if there are widespread powers given to any enforcement agency which is run by a government or a dispensation, right, which is not subject to judicial intervention, and the kind of provisions that have been inserted look like an all-encompassing provision giving powers for search, seizure, and arrest wherever required. Now, these kind of provisions, when they are put into a statute in an industry which is generating the kind of revenue that Juhi spoke about, any startup, even if they are today looking at an e-sport with a kind of a new age model which kind of optimizes within the framework of the act, I would be skeptical, right? The first thing is classification, whether it is an e-sport. Second is that, I may be subject to various notices, scrutinies, etc., on my financial model, how I regulate the entity. So any kind of widespread unchecked powers, at least that's what the provisions on the face of it talk about, are scary in the environment that we stay in.
Okay, let's change the gears a bit here, and in fact, let me ask you a question that a couple of gaming companies have already come out and they said that they are not going to challenge the ruling, and they are stopping the real money gaming and all of that, whereas some, I mean, we have seen, are going to the court. Do you think that these are also going to join, or is it the industry is divided between people who are kind of saying that, okay, we will follow what government says, and the other one says that, no, I think there are a lot of very good grounds on which we can challenge. So how does this pan out really?
I think any business model which has been developed over time basis consistent ruling of judicial precedents and being affected by crores, I think we would be really, I think, not in the right frame of mind to say that we're not going to challenge it. So there may be different fronts that may be put up for political posturing purposes, but certainly any company which is liable to lose its presence or liable to lose several crores in its business is likely to challenge this, because these business models have also evolved over a period of time. So I don't think companies which are coming out and outrightly saying this in the media, that may be just posturing for the moment.
But there may be a possibility that they have better and newer models in mind that they can kind of focus on in future. Like, for example, there could be some AI driven format, there could be some educational games, there could be some other creative ecosystem that they would create, and that could actually make it cleaner as far as the regulation is concerned,
I
and
think
perhaps more interesting for the consumers.
I think promise of the future can't compensate the loss of today. I think that would be my position on that.
And
All
Aman,
right.
just to add in,
Yeah.
let's not forget one thing. This is one industry that over the last decade, you would have witnessed it's very compliance forward. So not surprised with the positioning, not surprised with them doing an immediate shutdown, whether it is KYC, they've enforced it to the T, whether it is the simulation of data, they've done that as well, doing GST, while, there have been multiple rounds of litigation on that, but they've all done it. And let's not forget one thing. The exchequer is about to lose a couple of thousand crores. Is that money coming out of the pocket of the Indian players? The answer to that is no. It's actually the companies who are bearing that money. It's not as if the burden is being passed on. And also, like you said, there is a lot of conversation about pivots. We've seen some of the larger players come forward and say, they're going to pivot. The question that beckons is, what happens to those LAC engineers, right? We can't leave them jobless as of tomorrow, which is also one of the key reasons as to why the pivot is necessary, to say the least. The pivots that are known to the industry presently is one is gone towards something in the finance and the money segment. Some people are also looking at casual gaming. People are also looking at esports. But time will tell if they will bring in as much money and business as the real money gaming models. That is to be seen.
So, Juhi, how does it work globally? Like, let's look at the regulatory frameworks here vis-a-vis, other markets like UK, US, etc. If you can, throw some light on that.
So UK is a licensing regime where there are, there's mandatory responsible gaming tools that are there. There's transparency in terms of odds, which is where the randomizer tool comes in. And of course, there are penalties for violation. As opposed to that, US being the federal structure that it is, it's a very state-oriented law. There are several states that are very progressive in terms of permitting gaming. And not just, real money gaming and games of skill. They also sort of regulate the iGaming sector, also regulate what we call as casinos. And there is very, very strict norms on licensing requirements, very strict norms on payout requirements. So much so they also sort of control how much a casino is entitled to retain. So they are regulatory first. None of them are prohibitory. Even for that matter, EU has, very, very many places where you notice there's iGaming that is prevalent. All of them have strict taxation regimes. They have compliance standards, but they're not prohibitory. They're all regulation forward.
I see. I think that is something that, we can, argue and hope for. My last question to you, Angad, is that moving forward, what legislative or judicial mechanisms could ideally balance consumer protection with innovation in online gaming? What would meaningful stakeholder engagement between government, industry, and civil society look like?
Right. No, I think to start with just the manner in which this statute was passed, I think within 7 minutes it was passed in Lok Sabha, within 26 minutes it was passed in the Rajya Sabha, followed by the presidential assent on the next day. So I don't think there was really much debate around the statute with industry stakeholders. And I think the kind of outcomes that this act leads to, it is excessive in nature, right? It does have a wide rippling effect on, as I mentioned earlier, jobs, the economy, the taxes which are being collected. So there should have been more engagement. There should have been, including consumer feedback taken. For instance, there are these apps which run games such as poker, etc. People are actually making an income out of it, and they were perhaps running their houses out of it, right? So I think a regulatory framework to be put in place, like what Juhi said, with KYC, age limit considerations, licensing requirements, or maybe quarterly reports being filed. That perhaps would have been a more proportionate outcome, taking everybody along, rather than kind of looking at this extremely, prohibitory kind of position. But the way the statute has been passed, I don't think the centre is in any mood to retract or retreat from its position. But we have full faith in the judiciary. So I'm sure whoever's there before the judiciary will get justice at the end of the day.
Yeah, well said, and let's see how this whole thing pans out. In fact, we would be waiting for what happens in the Karnataka High Court, that is planned for tomorrow, and let's hope for the best. And thank you so much, Angad. Thank you so much, Juhi, for being a part of this very engaging conversation. And we'll see you next when we have another interesting development that is happening on policy and regulatory issue.
Thank you
so
Aman,
much
for having us.
Thank you so much, Aman, for having us.